Tonight, the story of how some of our most vulnerable children have become victims of abuse and neglect in the homes set up to protect them. It's a story from the heart, told by the children themselves and their carers who've also been traumatised by the system. There have been billions of dollars spent, and since 1997, more than 40 inquiries into child protection around the country. Yet the scandals continue. In this story, you'll hear from young people placed in privately run residential group homes, usually after their own families have failed them and foster family arrangements have broken down. The kids call it resi, and it's meant to provide a safe and nurturing environment. The children you'll meet in Linton Bess's story are current and former resi kids. We've given each of them a new name for the programme.
So you're looking at that one?
Yeah, just at me. You just
everything else.
Okay.
You just look at my ugly mug and ignore everyone else, all right?
And it's all good. We're rolling and we're ready.
I'm going to call you Renee, okay?
Why Renee?
Oh, I don't know. You're still a ward of the state, aren't you?
Yes. I've been in care ever since I was little. I've been in several foster homes. Refuges, sorry. I've been in one foster home. Been with different organisations.
Renee's 17. She's an expert on Australia's appalling child protection system because she's been in it all her life.
My parents were drug addicts. So I got put into foster care when I was 5 months old. From then, I was put in a foster home, I think. And then when I was 9 months old, I was fostered by 2 people from Sydney. I was with them for 11 years, 12 years, until my placement broke down. And then that's when I went into residential care.
The group homes she's been in lately have been the worst.
The police were called probably about once or twice a week. There was assaults, damages to property, sexual assaults, intimidation.
Sounds pretty full on to be living in.
It was. It is.
With only months before she turns 18, Renee is finally going to be free of the system.
Unless you've actually been in the position, you're not actually going to know how hard and tough it is. It might not seem like it because some people put a brave face on and act like it's nothing, but it is a big upsetting thing to think about and to go through, and I don't wish it upon anybody because it's not a good environment.
Natalie O'Teeny was a carer in one of Renee's group homes. She doesn't work with her anymore, but the mother of 3 is one of the few adults the teenager trusts.
Renee's the character. She's funny. She has a very sweet heart. She can be feisty as well, but that gets her through. She's a very loyal friend to her friends and very loving.
Natalie O'Teeny is still an employee at Life Without Barriers, one of Australia's largest private providers of out-of-home foster care. Having survived a broken family herself, Natalie is passionate about her job. For the past 18 months, she's been on workers' compensation, still reeling from what she saw in a Life Without Barriers group home.
I remember being so optimistic and so positive and, oh, wow, this is going to be great. We're going to be helping young people prepare for independent living and, we'll do a little bit of counselling and mentoring and I think it'd be fantastic. I walked in there and I just thought, wow, I must have been living in a bubble because I didn't even know kids lived like this. I just couldn't even believe this was happening in Australia. It was amazing for me.
Children who are taken from abusive or neglectful parents are usually placed with foster families. When that falls apart, however, the children are sometimes placed in group homes.
By the time they're about 12 or 13, their placements break down. And then they end up in the residential homes and they're told that, you're in resi because nobody wants you. We can't find a home for you. We can't find a foster family for you. I couldn't imagine being told that. You're so bad that we can't place you anywhere. This is where you have to live now.
From the outside, the resi home in regional New South Wales where Renee lived looked like any other. On the inside, though, with 4 or 5 teenagers from broken homes and sometimes just a single carer on duty, it was a dangerous environment.
The kind of incidents that would happen would be absconding, drug and alcohol issues, stealing cars, property damage. Whenever there's a tantrum, there'll be a smashed window, a hole in the wall.
Yelling, screaming, fighting, police in the house, neighbours standing outside watching. It was just a regular thing.
Became normal.
Yeah. I'd be ashamed to walk outside my house when the neighbours are outside thinking that I was the one. I can't say that because I did bad things as well.
Like what? What bad things did you do?
I'm not saying. Yell, scream, get angry, punch stuff. I'd be so angry, I would just punch my wall, not meaning to put a hole in it, just my anger. But it would end up with a damaged wall.
Wouldn't it hurt your hand?
Adrenaline, when you're angry, don't really feel it.
Home to children anyone would find difficult to care for, there were troubling incident reports filed regularly in this house. Most alarming were those that described the young girls being preyed upon by older men.
Yes, a couple of the girls were on dating sites, even though they were younger. They would meet up with random guys.
These men would turn up at the house and they would hop in these strangers' cars and just go. they would sometimes go missing for days. And they'd be all over the country.
You don't learn about sex in a resi home if you go to school, which hardly any resi kids do. There'll be a sex education class, but hardly anybody went to school. So you don't learn about not falling pregnant or doing unsafe sexual activities.
So what ends up happening?
You fall pregnant.
In less than a year, 2 girls fell pregnant in this resi house. One of them was Amy. She was 16 at the time. How many resi homes did you live in?
That I know of, 2.
And for how many years?
The first one would have been about a year and a half, maybe less. And second one, how long do you reckon? About the same.
How did it come to be that you were, lived in a resi home? What was your story, if you feel comfortable telling me about it?
I've been moved around to different foster... Sorry, stop.
Amy has been in and out of the system since she was 4 years old. She spent about a year living in the same resi house as Renee.
In this house, we did whatever we wanted. Went to bed at whatever time we wanted. We would get people who had the licence to pick us up in the middle of the night. We didn't care about any rules. Some of the kids, well, approximately majority of the kids don't get looked after. They don't get what they need, like clothes. I just find it stupid. They shouldn't have them.
Cara Anderson was another frontline worker in Amy and Renee's resi home.
At times we would be, walking into things where young people were trying to commit suicide. So they'd be self-harming. We'd then be calling ambulances. We'd be sitting in ambulances. We'd be going to hospitals, spending hours on end, sitting with a young person that has severely hurt themselves. Where was our support? We had no support again. So us as workers, on a daily basis, you would just have no idea of what you'd walk into. But we were expected to be able to work with those young people on our own.
When Amy fell pregnant, Cara Anderson was the worker she leaned on.
She was excited because she wanted to have a baby. But as it sort of progressed, she did get a little bit concerned of what was going to happen when she had the baby, how she was going to look after the baby, was she going to be a good mother? So I guess it's that, wanting to be mature and being happy and excited about being pregnant, but at the same time thinking about what it was going to be like. So I got a call out probably 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning to go to the hospital, and they basically had to induce her for the baby to be born. So I spent 3 days, 3 full days in labour with her.
I had the epidural, which pretty much allows you not to feel any pain from the waist down. I couldn't move. Just like I was paralysed.
Must have been terrifying.
It was.
About half an hour after that, I was waiting up with the family, and I was first to be told that the baby had actually passed. So, unfortunately, Amy had lost her baby. At that time, it was difficult. The time that I'd spent with Amy and seeing ultrasounds and then hearing that he'd passed was difficult. I rang my management to let them know, but my manager was too busy at the time and told me that I needed to get another worker to come and relieve me from the hospital, as I'd been there for 3 days and I hadn't slept.
Cara Anderson will never work in resi care again.
I was very passionate about youth work. I still am very passionate about youth work, but the events that I went through pushed me psychologically to have to physically leave my job.
A not-for-profit agency, Life Without Barriers is often given hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars per child per year to care for them. But it's had a checkered past. In 2011, the organisation publicly apologised for putting 12 children in harm's way. Now there's fresh evidence of appalling failures by this agency and others to keep kids safe.
Residential care is a spectacular public failure, public policy failure. Most of the kids who come into resi, a huge proportion of them, are the most traumatised in this system of out-of-home care children. And that's governed by the fact, and it's demonstrated by the fact that nobody wants them. So this group of children are the ones that nobody really wants, or that people have had experience with and don't want them back. Maybe they're foster carers, maybe they're kinship carers, but their needs have been just too much for these carers to handle. So they come into the most unsuitable of models of care, and that is residential care.
If we're going to make a decision to remove children from their family of origin, it has to be to something better. If we remove them and we offer them something not better and often something worse, then that's almost a crime. We cannot compound the misery these children have experienced, and yet that's what we're doing.
Helen Keevers worked in child protection for decades, helping establish New South Wales foster care standards. She says in the past decade, as resi homes have gradually shifted out of government hands, they've become big business.
What in fact happened was there seemed to be a growth beginning around that time of a new type of provider. Frankly, providers who began to see this as an opportunity for business, and they took over providing care for the government in this situation and have grown like topsy.
Third-party providers are an attractive solution for governments, but when asked to accommodate additional children, they can charge up to $1 million per kid.
If you have a child that's particularly difficult to place, there's the opportunity to ask for exceptional funding on top of that. I have heard people in the sector, managers who've been approached to take some of these young people, talking about picking a figure and doubling it, because they know that the government is desperate to place these young people.
The failure of Life Without Barriers to create a safe home for Renee and Amy is all too commonplace in organisations across the country.
I think we should explode this model. I find it very difficult to make comments about whether it should be done by government or the community services sector. I think it's a system that should be exploded, where these hundreds and hundreds of children should be cared for in a much more proactive way.
Last year, Victoria's then Children's Commissioner, Bernie Geary, wrote a searing report into the state's resi homes.
The first case in the report describes a 14-year-old girl stuck on a railway station, 12 midnight, ringing to be picked up. And she was refused, and she was consequently raped on the railway station that night.
He found widespread systemic failures that placed already vulnerable children in yet further danger.
You know, the bottom line about residential care is it shouldn't exist. We shouldn't have residential care. We should be able to raise these kids in communities, in families, where they are in a situation that they feel special. But we're forced onto the back foot because the care, the resources isn't applied to these children at the top of the cliff.
Bernie Geary's investigation has led to a reduction in the number of children in resi homes in Victoria. The New South Wales government has also promised reform, but there are still thousands of children living in resi around the country.
I've seen children, in my experience, who have died and who have cried in my arms, etc. But the child who said, "I'm not special in the eyes of anyone," is a child that affected me the most.
Why is that?
Because I'm a grandfather and a father. Yep.
Tell us her story.
Oh, look, she's just a kid whose life at 14 years of age had come to the stage of just thinking that nobody believed in her. And that's just terrible, I reckon. I'm not going to cry or I'd finish. Sorry.
The neglect of children by residential care providers is a national problem. It's the same story in Tasmania.
It is nothing short of a sham because these children aren't given the opportunity to have this support and the counselling and the programs that need to be put in place. They weren't put in place.
In July, Jan Holbrow resigned as a local manager with resi home provider Safe Pathways. Safe Pathways is a for-profit company which can charge taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for each child.
I don't believe there should be profits made out of children's lives. However, that is exactly what's happening. The money certainly didn't trickle down to the children that I was caring for, so it certainly shouldn't be a profit in regards to children's well-being.
Safe Pathways is part of a conglomerate built on government contracts for services across the welfare sector. Last year, the group turned over more than $70 million. But former staff say it ran its resi services in Tasmania on a shoestring.
It got extremely threadbare. I do believe that the purchase orders for the groceries were $100 a week. It's very difficult to provide food and necessities for $100 a week for a child. And so that was very difficult. So quite often the food would be very, very sparse, and also clothing was ridiculously sparse. I know that one child had one pair of underpants. So he should have been obviously bought more underwear for himself. That wasn't the case.
This is a Safe Pathways quote for the emergency placement of a child in one of its Tasmanian resi homes. Including staff, training, rent and therapy, it came to more than $9,000 a week.
On its website, it says its residential facilities are, quote, physically and emotionally safe places in which children experience a home environment under the supervision of trusting and caring adults who provide access to services required to recover from past traumas. In reality, is that what happens?
No, simply because unfortunately many of the staff weren't trained to deal with such complexities of these children.
When you started at Safe Pathways, Chris, walk me through the kind of training that they gave you.
I've never been trained in anything with safe pathways.
Not at all?
Not at all.
Former Army medic turned aged care worker, Chris Dawkins was hired by Safe Pathways at the start of the year. His main role was to care for one 12-year-old boy. He says he was never fully briefed on the boy's needs.
I wasn't given any paperwork at all. We were told that we'd receive a care plan, so we knew what type of child we were dealing with. I, to this day, haven't seen a care plan on any of the children.
I believe the 12-year-old boy had 5 relocation of residences in as many months, and I believe the last reason that he was relocated to a hotel room was because the organisation had taken on 2 other children and needed that home that he was in.
And why would they do that?
I guess money. It's money. They didn't have any other place to put these children, but yet they'd been given the thumbs up from the government to care for them, so they needed somewhere to keep them.
Safe Pathways was so disorganised, the child didn't even have a permanent shelter. Chris Dawkins shuttled him from place to place.
The homes ranged from houses, B&Bs, overnight cabins in caravan parks. There was a variety of accommodation. The only money I saw spent on this boy was initially for food. He received a purchase order of $100 a week for food. There was no clinician, no therapists, no clothing. There was a house phone provided at each site, but there was never any credit on the phone, so you couldn't make any calls anyway.
For Chris Dawkins, things came to a head on September 29 this year, a cold and rainy day, when the 12-year-old boy was booted out of a caravan park with nowhere else to go.
It was a terrible, shocking, rainy, wet, windy day. The young boy got wet and cold, and I actually sat him in my car and started up the engine to run the heater so he'd keep warm.
Chris Dawkins resigned that night, sending this email to the company. Having to pay for the boy's accommodation out of my own pocket. What a fucking joke. I have bought him food as he didn't have any. I'm over the whole company called Safe Pathways who have failed to provide a duty of care for the children. The 12-year-old boy has now been moved out of the care of Safe Pathways.
I accidentally ran into him the other day, told me what had happened, that he'd been taken from Safe Pathways, put with another company, and that he now had food. That was his opening comment.
What were his words? What did he say?
Guess what, bro? I've got food. With a big smile on his face.
Premier Youthworks is another for-profit provider operating in the ACT and New South Wales.
In everything that we do, the kids come first.
Premier Youthworks resi homes look inviting and comfortable in this slick corporate video.
We want them to feel just like normal kids. So things like...
After 5 years with the company, however, Ronald Isles says the reality is very different.
Yes, okay, so you walk straight into the house. Normally the flat screen will be broken straight away. Everything's graffiti, paint everywhere. The carpets are disgusting, they're stained, you know, food under the beds, clothes everywhere. Some kids would, you know, pee or poo on the carpets, and sometimes that would get missed by staff that were too busy doing things or just disconnected and wouldn't go into the room. Holes in the walls, like the smell of the place. It was either smelled really dirty or it would be really clean because if we just bleached it.
Every foster child brings in between $550 and $1,700 a day for Premier Youthworks. Last year, it received about $20 million in taxpayer funding. Another former employee, Jenna McGlynn, says not enough of this money is trickling down to the children.
So the money that they're getting, there's no way that they are spending what they're getting on those kids at all. Nowhere near, I don't think.
They knew that I was someone that didn't give up on any of these kids, no matter.
Premier Youthworks is owned by this woman, Lisa Glenn.
I started Premier Youthworks because I saw that there were a group of children that were quite young that were being bounced around refuges, and these were the most damaged and vulnerable kids. I saw that something needed to happen.
She was such a nice lady, and I was like, wow, look at this down-to-earth lady who's doing all this great work. But I was like, well, it's a bit weird. How's she making all this money? Considering it's, you know, this sort of work is generally a not-for-profit sort of job, so it surprised me a little bit.
Four Corners has discovered that 12 of the company's resi homes are owned by Lisa Glenn and her personal self-managed super funds, each a $1 company. The New South Wales properties are charged back out of the Resi Kids funding at grossly inflated rents. One house where median rents are $370 a week is costing taxpayers $900 a week. Another is charged back at $945 a week. That's a markup of $575 a week over the suburb's median rent. In all, Lisa Glenn's companies are receiving more than $250,000 a year above median rent. Last year, the company was found to be underpaying its frontline staff to the tune of more than $2 million.
We ended up having to go to Fair Work with them quite a few times for them to pay it right. I think it's completely wrong to take profit away from something that could be potentially enhancing a child's life, a child that has gone through a traumatic experience and will never actually fully recover from that. I think it's disgusting.
Lisa Glenn declined to give an interview to Four Corners, but said in a statement that the rents Premier Youthworks pays are based on market value and higher insurance premiums. The company also said it does everything possible to provide the best care and support to every child.
These children are the children of the state, and some operator from outside is making money out of these children of the state. I think we forget who these children are, that everybody who might watch Four Corners has to understand that they are our children. We have a responsibility to them. And as we say, there are people out there who are actually making a buck out of them. It's terrible.
Governments are desperate to find beds for foster children, and they're willing to pay huge sums to private operators who'll do so. It's a situation that leads too often to the placement of children into unsafe resi homes. Support worker Cara Anderson says the mix of children in the New South Wales Life Without Barriers house was disastrous.
I don't believe the house that I was working in, the young people were safe. You'll have people from different backgrounds, abuse, neglect, and I don't believe that these young people were safe in this particular house. Reason being was management. staffing, the way the house was structured, and the young people that were in there together.
There was kids in the house that would come into your room unannounced, unwelcome, and just go through your things and think, oh, well, this is expensive and this is nice, so I can take that and sell it for drugs or sell it for money.
In this resi home lived 2 teenage boys. One with a history of alleged sexual assault. It was into this toxic environment that Life Without Barriers placed a 12-year-old girl who herself had been a victim of sexual assault.
She had so many problems. She was just a little kid.
She was horribly bullied. From the time she got up in the morning until she went to bed. It was heartbreaking.
She shouldn't be in a resi home with 4 other children that also need attention. They should have set the house up right. Because she needed a lot of attention, she should have been put in another house with 1 other kid, not 4 older kids.
How stupid are they? Like, it's not rocket science. You don't have to be Einstein to understand if you have a boy that likes to manipulate and possibly sexually assault young people 13 and under, why would you move a child of 12 in that house? Who's a sexual assault victim?
No fewer than 30 incident reports were filed during the girl's first 5 months in the house. Many of them warned Life Without Barriers the young girl was at risk of being abused. Despite these warnings, the girl wasn't moved until it was too late.
The boy had come into the office and told me that he'd done something really bad. And I asked him what really bad meant, and he said it's really, really, really bad. And I said, describe really, really, really bad. And he told me that he'd had sex with the younger girl and the condom had broken, and now the bitch might be pregnant.
In fact, Life Without Barriers could have prevented the sexual assault from ever happening. The house manager told investigators he had pushed very hard not to have her matched to the house. It was my decision that it was a no. That was overridden.
It's child abuse. It's criminal. Why do they get away with it?
The young girl has since been moved to another Life Without Barriers resi home. The organisation said in a statement it provides the highest possible standard of care, that reports of misconduct are taken very seriously, and all staff are provided with ongoing training and support.
It's not an aberration to hear about children who are sexual offenders being thrust into a house with others. And when it happens, it's inept practice. It's almost evil practice, because we know that an innocent child is going to be harmed. And I say, how dare they?
For decades, these children have fallen through the gaps. Veterans of this broken system are asking how much longer we can allow it to continue.
What I can't wrap my head around is why children are removed because they're neglected, only to end up being a teenager in a resi house still neglected. Why don't they just leave them with their families if that's what's going to happen to them? I just can't understand it.
We are effectively creating a subclass of people. We are treating people as if they don't deserve to have proper care, proper support and proper healing. We're preparing these young people for very little alternative but the corrective services that follow when they turn 18 or even before. We're sitting on a time bomb.
In February, for the first time since she was 5 months old, Renee will finally be out of the system.
Four months until I'm 18, so that's when I have to leave resi care because they don't let over 18 stay there. And I'm nervous but excited at the same time.
What's exciting about it?
I get to do things on my own, like I get to be an individual.
Instead of
Always having people around in the house, younger kids, older kids, carers, 24/7. I'm excited to actually just have a house on my own. Be able to have friends come over when I feel like it. Be a normal kid. Sorry. I'm ruining her makeup.
There's some there. There's some tissues there beside you.
You all right?
One of my questions was going to be, why are you so tough?
I just keep it in. There's not... I don't feel comfortable talking about it. I don't really have anyone close to me. There's a few workers and carers that I have made a really good connection with, and they're the people that I can trust, but you can't really make a connection because they just come and go. I've always thought about it as it's not a home, it's just a house. See, that's what I'm excited for. When I turn 18, I get to have a home. Like, I get to decorate it, put stuff that I want in it, in the house, something that I choose, not something cheap and ugly that they choose. I get to choose it.